Hello and etc. students, I am George Washington. Mr. Jeffries has asked me to present one of my famous historical speeches for your NETC United States History 201 course. Excerpts from this particular speech were given by me, George Washington, in 1796, when I was stepping down after 2 terms, or 8 years, as President of the United States. My goal was to warn the United States against the development of a two-party political system. And I will now present excerpts of my farewell address. Let me now take a more comprehensive view, and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed, but, in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness, and is truly their worst enemy. Mr. Jeffries wanted me to point out, and for you to note, that I, Washington, realize that parties will exist, but that the American people should not get caught up in party politics. And now, Washington's speech continued. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads, at length, to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result, gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation, on the ruins of public liberty. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies, and false alarms kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which finds a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus, the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another. Again, Mr. Jeffries says to note that I am simply saying that individuals may be prone to vote for the party rather than the issues, if a two-party system develops. And I am warning that this could potentially be dangerous. Now, I will continue my speech. There is an opinion that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. This within certain limits is probably true, and in governments of a monarchical caste, patriotism may look, with indulgence, if not, with favor upon the spirit of party. But, in those of the popular character, in governments purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. From their natural tendency it is certain there will always be enough of that spirit, for every salutary purpose. And there being constant danger of excess, the effort ought to be by force of public opinion to mitigate and assuage it. A fire not to be quenched, it demands a uniform vigilance, to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest instead of warming, it should consume. It is important, likewise, that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration, to confine themselves, within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the powers of one department to encroach upon another. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one, and thus to create, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. A just estimate of the love of power, and proneness to abuse it, which predominates in the human heart, is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power, by dividing and distributing it into different depositories, and constituting each the guardian of the public will against invasions by the others, has been evidenced by experiments, ancient and modern, some of them in our country, and under our own eyes. to preserve them must be as necessary as to institute them. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution, or modification, of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But, let there be no change by usurpation, for though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always greatly overbalance, in permanent evil, any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. Students, please note, Mr. Jeffries says the analysis of what I have previously stated is that political parties may be good in some instances, but ultimately they divide the common people and may allow political leaders to abuse their powers. Speech continued. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician equally with the pious man ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. It is substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule indeed extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who that is a sincere friend to it, can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric. Promote then as an object of primary importance institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. In proportion as the structure of a government gives force to public opinion, it is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. End speech. Tech history students, please realize that just a few years after I left office with my warning to the citizens of the United States against the two-party system, the government split into two political factions. One party was the Federalist Party, led by my Vice President John Adams, and my Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton. And the other party was Democratic Republicans, led by my former Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. This, indeed, did cause a major rift in the political system of the United States, just as I had warned, particularly during the presidential election of 1800. Thank you, Mr. Jeffries, for this opportunity, and thank you, students. I hope you have learned something about American government history, and most importantly my perspective concerning the two-party system. Goodbye.